Hey guys, so it's been a while since my last build video, but since we got some new essences released last week for all the classes, I thought now would be a really good time to kind of update all of my old build guide videos. I'm going to be starting with the Wizard class, but don't worry, I will be going through the other classes. I'm probably going to be doing the Crusader and Tempest next, but if you do want me to play your class, just do leave a comment in this video, and I'm going to be looking to cover some of the other classes on my channel. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the builds that I like to use for dungeons, raids, gauntlets, and also showing the top DPS solo that I've managed to get for Wizard. So firstly, I'm going to start off with the new dungeon build that I like to use. So to get a baseline for comparison, I'm going to compare it to my old dungeon build, which I've showcased on my channel before. This build still performs extremely well and it's kind of my go-to build, but I wanted to see just how much of an improvement the new dungeon build, which I'm going to show, has. So I'm going to be starting off with a quick 10-second damage rotation with my old dungeon build here. So let's get started. So whenever I do a new build guide, I always like to kind of do a comparison with the old build that I had, because there's no point doing a new build. It isn't an improvement over the old build. So as you can see here, for a 10-second damage rotation, I did 46.5 million damage, which works out to about 4.6 million damage per second. And this is mostly coming from Magic Missile, so this is a primary attack-based build. And the damage is being boosted a lot by the Black Hole, which gives a 28.5% damage increase to all of the damage that you do from the Silver Lightning Helmet. And then for the mobility, I've got the Lightning Nova from the Sprite Spark chest. So now let's compare this to my new dungeon build. And let's just go for 10 seconds here. One thing that you'll notice straight away is that I've got this huge AoE effect around me, and it's just dealing a huge amount of damage. And we've also dropped Black Hole and Meteor, so we're actually dealing more consistent damage over time, because the build is a lot less clunky to play. It is still a primary attack build, so most of the damage is coming from Magic Missile, but now we've got a bunch of different skills and essences which I'm going to go through. So this build ended up doing 5.65 million damage per second, and it gave me 10 million more damage in a 10-second rotation, which works out to about a 21% increase. So let's talk about the setup for this new dungeon build. Firstly, let's talk about the skills. I'm using Lightning Nova, I'm using Slow Time, Disintegrate, Ice Armor, and Magic Missile for the primary attack. For the legendary essence, I'm using the new essence we got, which is the Autumnal Crest. I'm using this with Slow Time. So this basically gives a field that follows you. So it's an AoE effect, which applies a shock to nearby enemies, and it's going to give basically some damage over time effect, which is very useful. The shock effect also buffs the Disintegrate, which with the Shoulders and Pants essence. So let's take a quick look at those. So the Filtered Defense. This is the new Shoulders essence that we got for Disintegrate. Disintegrate now surrounds you with an entropy field that follows you, damaging and making enemies vulnerable to critical hits. And we also have the Raptor's Tail Pants, which says that when Disintegrate hits a shocked enemy, it unleashes a chain lightning, which deals 12,000 damage to the target and 2 nearby enemies. So this is really good for extra AoE damage inside the dungeon. So if we just take a look at these new essence in action, we've got Slow Time, which gives this huge AoE circle, and then we've got the Disintegrate, which gives a slightly smaller AoE circle, but the effect does jump from nearby enemies because of the Pants essence that we're using. So if we just take a closer look at these two new essence, we can see for Disintegrate, the Pants essence can give us a 2% increased crit chance, which can stack up to a maximum of 10%, which is really nice. It also gives us a continual damage effect. And the Pants essence gives us this nice effect, which gives us extra damage to shocked enemies, which can occur once every second, and it can hit up to 2 nearby enemies. And the Slow Time, like I said, gives us this shock effect and also does damage over time, which is really nice. So those are pretty much all the new essence in the build. Other than that, all of the other essence we're using are pretty easy to explain. We've got the Sprite Spark, so this is where all of our movement speed and mobility comes from. So it transfigures you into a ball of pure lightning, allowing you to move at high speed and dealing continual damage. So this gives us a 50% increased movement speed. If we just take a look here, you can see it's giving us 50% increased movement speed, and we have almost 100% uptime of this, so it's really good to use. So other than that, all of the other essence we're using are old ones. So we've got the Volatile Arbiter. This is just a no-brainer. This buffs our Magic Missile damage. It basically says that Magic Missile explodes every 3 hits, dealing 22,000 damage, which is incredibly good. And then we've got the Old Rustic, which buffs our primary attack speed from Lightning Nova. So when we use Lightning Nova, we've got 30% increase to our primary attack speed. For the offhand essences, we're using the Dancing Lightning with the Ice Armor. So this says that it bestows the grace of thunder upon you and your nearby summons. Even if you don't have summons, this still does a great amount of damage, but I have a few summons here from my Echoing Shade gem, which just gives us that extra bit of kick. And then finally, we're using the Blaster Cast. This basically says that Magic Missile fires 2 additional missiles, which deal extra damage. So this is just a no-brainer to have for this build, since it's a primary attack build. For the set items, I've kept it pretty simple. It's just the classic 4-piece Banquet and also 4-piece Vithus set. So we've got 30% increase attack speed here, which is really nice. It also increases our beneficial effect duration by 30%, which is crucial because we want to have 100% uptime of all of our skills. And for the Banquet set, we've got the 15% increase to enemies suffering from continual damage effects, and also an extra 2.5 critical hit chance for every continual damage effect. So as for the eternal properties in this build, there aren't really that many which are useful, but I'll go through the ones which could be okay. We've got the Lightning Nova, increased attack speed by 8% for 3 seconds. So unfortunately, this doesn't stack with the Vithus 30% buff, so you will only get 30% from Vithus, but if you do have 4 pieces of this stacked, this will give you 32% increase attack speed, which is really good. And in that case, you could actually drop 4 pieces of Vithus down to 2 piece, and then either use the Grace set or maybe even the Feasting Baron set for the increased harmful effect duration. The only other eternal property which could be kind of useful would be the increased movement speed from Ice Armor. This gives 8% increased movement speed, but because I already have my movement speed at 20%, once I use my Lightning Nova, which gives me 50% increased movement speed, I'm already hitting the movement speed cap. But if you don't have this 20% increased movement speed at a baseline, then this 8% could actually be kind of useful. So let's move on now to talk about legendary gems. I'm using Gloom Cask, which is really good because this is a primary attack speed build. I'm using the Void Spark, which is also really good just to have extra AoE effects. This gem is really good in PvE, especially because it can jump to up to 8 enemies. So this is a really good gem to have. We've got Bloodsoaked Jade, which gives us increased damage, but it also gives us 10% movement speed, which means that we only need an extra 10% movement speed from our gear, which will get us to the 70% cap. So that's really good. This is kind of a must-have gem. Then I'm using Echoing Shade, which is providing me with extra shadow clones, which are really good to get buffed by the Ice Armor, but you don't really need this gem, to be honest. You could definitely live without it in this build and just go for pure continual damage effects, which would buff your Banquet of Ice set even more, which would be really good. So I'm using Seeping Bile, which gives us the poison effect, which is really nice with the Banquet set. And then I'm using Svensson's Haunting with the auxiliary Storm Vault. I just don't have a better auxiliary at the moment. This isn't really the best gem to use, but because I have it ranked up so high, I just thought, why not just add it to this build? If you have something like Viper's Bite, or maybe even Everlasting Torment, or Igneous Scorn, maybe even Pain Clasp or Fervent Fang would work much better here. Then I've got the Howler's Call with the auxiliary of Rolling Consequence. I wish I had this gem. I'm working my way to actually get this gem ranked up itself and just replace Howler's Call. This is such a great gem, probably one of the best gems in the game. It gives you critical hit chance and also gives you a burn effect, which is damage over time, which is really nice in this build. And then finally, I'm using the Bottled Hope. So we've got quite a lot of buffs in this build. We've got our Lightning Nova, we've got our Ice Armor. Pretty much every skill in this build is a buff, so this is kind of a no-brainer to include in the build. For the Awakenings, it's pretty simple. Every single slot here gives damage. So we've got Slow Time damage here, Lightning Nova damage here, Lightning Nova damage also here. And then we've got Disintegrate damage in both the shoulders and the pants slot. Then we've got Magic Missile damage in the main hand slot here, Volatile Arbiter, Magic Missile damage here. And then finally, this is the only slot that has cooldown. This has 10% Ice Armor cooldown. So in order of priority, I would say that the Magic Missile Awakenings are the most important. That would be the offhand slot here and this main hand slot. Other than that, I would probably go for the Disintegrate damage unless you really need the Ice Armor cooldowns. Having extra damage for your Slow Time and Lightning Nova is a nice to have, but it isn't really necessary in this build. For the curse properties, I'm using 6-piece Atrophied and 2-piece Lashed at the moment. Probably using 6-piece Lashed would be a bit better, but I decided not to change this because this is the setup that I'm using currently for my PvP build, which I'm going to have a video about. So this is just what I'm using for now, but you can use what you'd like. For the Reforged properties, it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of your personal preference, what you'd like. Some things that I would recommend you to have would be the primary attack damage, the beneficial effects, and also attack speed. These 3 are really good. And then I've just gone for 3-piece Vengeance on top of this, so it just gives me a little bit more extra damage, but you could play with whatever you'd like here. Let's move on to talk about the Paragon tree. So I'm using the classic damage setup, which is the Slinger tree. So I'm using this node here, and this node here, and then I'm using these two nodes here. So what this does is it gives me 15 stacks, which is 15% increased damage when you use your primary attack and your skills. And then this gives me 6.5% increased critical hit chance when I'm at 10 stacks or more. I actually get to 10 stacks really quick as long as I'm hitting something, so this is really good. And then this gives me a 2% increased damage up to 8% the further I am from the enemy, and this gives me the same but for crit chance. So overall, this is the setup that I would recommend. For the warband room, I decided to use the attacker room for these warband dummy tests, but you could actually use the protector room just for the increased size, just so you move faster through dungeons. As long as you have this remnant here, which is the Shepherd's Burden, which gives you 15% increased size, then I would actually recommend you guys to use this instead. Before I move on to show the gameplay, I want to talk about two really important tips when playing any kind of build. So you really want to be pressing your skills just to check the uptime. As you can see, I have pretty much 100% uptime of these three skills here, which will be dealing the damage, which is the slow time, the disintegrate, and the ice armor. It's actually kind of overkill, the amount of beneficial duration and cooldowns that I have. As for Lightning Nova, I do have a slight downtime. I think it's about half a second downtime, but it's not the end of the world. I'm still able to move at very high speed through the dungeons. So you do want to have beneficial effect duration and cooldowns on most of your gear. So if we have a look here, you can see that my cooldown reduction is 17%. I have 5% of my gloves here. I have 4% cooldown here, and then another 5% cooldown here, and then I have also more cooldown on my Bottled Hope. You actually probably don't need this much cooldown, as I've shown, but it's still very nice to have just to make the build super smooth to play. And the second really important magic attribute you need is obviously beneficial effect duration. So I have that on my belt, I have it on my boots, and I have it also on my pants. I'm only missing it on my chest here. I will try to get it for my chest just so I get the 100% uptime of the Lightning Nova. So also, like I mentioned, you want to have 20% movement speed here in your sheet before pressing any skills, because this means that when you press your Lightning Nova in dungeons, you're going to reach the maximum movement speed, which is 70%. So the ways I get movement speed is from my Bloodsoaked Jade, so this gives me a flat 10% increased movement speed. Other than that, I have movement speed as my magic attribute on my amulet. I also have it here on my ring. I've got movement speed down here. And then finally, I also have it as one of my runes. So if we look at the rune here, I've got a 3% movement speed. So these give me 10%, and the Bloodsoaked Jade gives me another 10%, thus making it 20% movement speed. For the familiar that I'm using, if you guys have watched my other build guide videos, I really recommend for any PvE content that you use either a Brute Talon or a Skitterite. And you want to have one of those pets with basically the Lingering Wounds, which can give you a huge damage boost. I'm not going to go too far into this. I've gone through it in another video, so I'll just be linking this video if you guys want to check that out. So I'll be sharing some Inferno 3 dungeon gameplay here. This is the Pit of Anguish, and let's just see how quick I can take down this boss here. So there we go, the boss went down really easily. So because it is Inferno 3, I am still squishy because I am a wizard, but the cool thing about this build is that it is very smooth to play. You can just literally press every single skill as soon as it's off cooldown, and you don't really have to worry about casting Black Hole or Meteor at specific times just to get the most damage out of it. So let's just see how quick I can take down this worm here. So I do have to be careful just so I don't get one shot, but it is going down pretty smooth. Okay, hopefully I can take it down on the second phase here. Let's just pop all of our skills and the ulti. And there we go. So it did go down on the second phase, which is still pretty decent. If I was in a group, it would have probably gone down on the first phase there. But yeah, this is just melting through dungeons super fast. And even playing solo on Inferno 3, I have no problems clearing the dungeon, which is really nice. So now that we've gone through the new dungeon build, which is going to be our new base, I'm going to talk about the small adjustments that I like to make for Gauntlets, Oblivion Pillars, and also Raids and the top DPS build. So for Gauntlets and Oblivion Pillars, you actually still need to have decent mobility, because you will need to dodge some effects and also move closer to mobs or closer to the boss. So because you need to have a bit more survivability, you can actually switch out this offhand essence to the other ice armor offhand, which is the hailstone here. This will give you 6 charges of damage immunity, and it also chills nearby enemies. So this will give you a little bit less damage, but it will give you a huge amount of survivability. As you can see here, ice armor now looks like this. Other than that, the gameplay stays the exact same. So like I said, this is the build that I would use for Oblivion Pillars and also Heliquary Gauntlets. So finally, let's talk about my raids and top DPS build. Let's explain some of my choices here. So first of all, we don't need the Sprite Spark anymore because we don't really need the mobility so much. So we're just going to go for full DPS here. So what I decided on is actually the new chest essence, which says that Lightning Nova now calls a lightning orb to orbit you, and this deals lightning damage to enemies it hits. So this is an extremely good chest. It gives actually the most DPS, as you'll be able to see from the dummy test. So that's the first change that I wanted to make. So because Lightning Nova is actually going to become one of the main damage dealers in this build, other than Magic Missile primary attack, we have a few other choices. The first one is this Radiant Spline's main hand essence, which reads that when Lightning Nova deals a critical hit, it emits a charge bolt which deals 12,000 damage. So I actually tested this and it was actually pretty promising, but unfortunately it didn't deal as much damage for me as the essences which I have for Magic Missile, which are the Volatile Orbiter and the Old Rustic. But one thing I would recommend is for you guys to test if this does more damage for you. If you have something like Mother's Lament or a ranked up Rolling Consequence where you actually have more critical hits than me, then this might actually be better than one of these two essences here. But I decided not to take up this essence. The other choice we have is the offhand essence. So this new offhand essence was actually very, very good, especially with the chest. So it reads, when Lightning Nova hits a shocked enemy, it unleashes another Lightning Nova. Cannot occur more often than once every 4.5 seconds. This is a really good offhand because it basically doubles the effect of our chest, which is really good. So this offhand doesn't work with all Lightning Nova chests, but with this specific new chest essence, it works very, very well. And it actually works even better than Ice Armor, so we can actually drop Ice Armor in this build. So because we've dropped Ice Armor for this new essence, which is kind of a worthwhile trade in my opinion, I've taken up a different skill, which is actually Meteor. And for Meteor, you can actually replace these pants for the Dead Star Striders here. This gives a really good amount of damage for Meteor. It says that it targets enemies with a star mark, causing meteorites to crash on their target location. And with these changes, this is actually the top DPS build that we have. The only thing that's left is just to change Ice Armor for Meteor, which is what I'm going to do here. So now our raid / top DPS build is complete. This is what it looks like. So there is an option for you guys to use the vanilla Meteor with the other Disintegrate Pants, the Raptor's Tail, like I already had. But I found that for single target, this does a bit more damage. The Raptor's Tail pants is really nice, especially when you have a lot of enemies, with it chaining together your shock effect, but it isn't really required, and I found that this just gives a nice little kick to the Meteor skill. So with that said, let's do a quick 10-second damage rotation for this build. So here we go for the top DPS build. You can see that I peaked at something like 9 million. I think in another test I peaked at almost 11 million. But as you can see, this just does an insane amount of damage, and we ended with 6.24 million damage per second, or 62.4 million total damage. Compared to my dungeon build, this is about 7 million more damage in a 10-second rotation, or about 10.4% extra damage. And let's have a quick look at the damage breakdown. So as you can see, there's two main sources of damage here. It's Magic Missile and also the Lightning Nova. Lightning Nova actually does slightly more damage than Magic Missile, which is just insane. So that's why I think that the combination is extremely powerful with the new chest and offhand essences. As you can see, Meteor's doing a decent bit of damage, not quite as much as Ice Armor, but unfortunately for Ice Armor, you do need the offhand essence, which we had to give up, like I said. But overall, this build can deal a huge amount of damage. So that's all the builds that I wanted to share in this video, guys. I hope that this video has been useful. Do let me know if you try out these builds or have any suggestions. You can always leave them in the comments. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace.